Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that you're here. I know a little bit about you, but my audience may not. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. This year I wrote a book called The Fun Habit, and it was, or it is, the exploration of looking at how we approach happiness here, especially in the Western world. Some of the problems of kind of pursuing happiness, and then some approaches to invite joy into your life that seem to be more advantageous than some of the things we're prescribed to on social media. So that's sort of my outside interest. I've been an academic in positive psychology, wow, for over 2 decades now. And then my day job is still in behavioral science, but it's more focused on using fitness as an intervention, kind of, pre-care, and using fitness as a medicinal method to help people live healthier lives.
Oh yeah. So you kind of have like all of the mental wellness like covered, like starting with fitness.
Yeah, I think that especially this year, coming out of the pandemic, it certainly is one of the biggest selling points, how much it has an effect on our mental health.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, yeah.
I
I
think a lot of folks were doing it really for aesthetic reasons, right? And
mhm.
I mean, it was really a mental health crisis coming out of the pandemic. And so now folks have found a whole host of modalities, and I think it's a lot more inclusive and inviting than it's ever been. So it's fun to be in that space right now.
Yeah, I can tell if I've gone for my walk, like starting in the morning, or if I have not gone, like later in the day. Like if I'm feeling like anxious or just like I can't catch my breath or I'm like rushing around. I'm like, oh, you know what? I know it's off. Like I didn't go for a walk this morning. Like I just need like that time to just be by myself to, clear my mind, like, okay, run through like whatever it is that I need to get done. So yeah, what is it that you do like mentally, or I mean physically, like for your own mental wellness?
So I'm addicted to Peloton. So
Ah,
yeah, I
yeah.
used to be an endurance athlete, and unfortunately,
Oh, okay.
um, uh, had an injury, and so needed to get a hip replacement.
Okay.
So now cycling's it for me. And then my kids have really gotten into climbing, and so as you know, my thing is fun, and so I
Yeah.
try to bundle these opportunities to get them off screens with things
Mhm.
like rope courses and mountain climbing, and um, I yeah, things of that nature. And then I love connecting to nature. So we've been doing a lot of walks as well.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. I did not know that you guys were into climbing and
Yeah.
like the cycling part of it. Yeah, like there's an addiction for sure to that. Like, are you okay? So this is maybe too much of a personal question,
No,
but
no,
are
let's
you
go
one of those
deep.
people that's like, if I'm sweating like crazy, I'm doing it right?
No, I'm quite the opposite,
Oh,
actually.
you are?
And
Okay.
yeah, I've been really, I mean, we don't want to take like a hard right this quickly because I'm notorious for doing that. But I've been, one of my new research interests has been micro exercising,
Okay.
because one of the things that I like to look at is how do we create systems that are supportive rather than, again, exclusive, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of grit, I had one research project critically looking at CrossFit. So again, for all the
Yeah.
CrossFitters listening, still love CrossFit, but it certainly is a pretty exclusive group, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
meant for a certain type. And so to answer your question, no, because I think that exercise at all levels, right? You just talked about a walk. I don't know that pre-pandemic, a lot of times walking, unless you were looking at like a geriatric population, would be considered
Yeah.
exercise. Now we know it absolutely is an amazing form of keeping fit because not enough people do it, right? So I think you need to create an extremely big tent, and there's a lot of things that you can do that if you're not drenched in sweat, will still have the same advantages as someone that still has the body for something like high intensity interval training.
Okay, I love that you took that hard right because before I had our daughter, I used to run like all the time, every day. It was honestly, it was mostly for my mental health. Like I really struggled in my early years as a stepmom, and that was kind of my escape. And now I'm like, I need out of this.
Likewise, so I
Yeah,
know.
right. Yeah, right. So I know you get it. Yeah. And then like in my early months of like being pregnant, like I still ran. And then it got to the point where I was like, this actually isn't that great. And so I had, I was like, well, that was kind of my escape. Like, what am I going to do now? I was a little bit anxious about it. And so then I found, again, we were talking before, all of the research that you can do on your own because you've got this little like computer in your hand, right? And so I was like, if I'm just walking, am I going to get the same benefit as if I'm running? And I found that, yeah, if I'm brisk walking, like it's, you know, essentially this, it's not exactly the same, but like essentially it's the same. Like it's still exercise. You're getting your body moving, like all of the things. So I like that you took that hard right because I'm like, yeah, okay, crazy person, like you don't have to be like drenching sweat in order to get the benefit of just moving your body. Like just do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame, right, that we create these barriers or sort of, social expectations that, well, if I'm not doing enough, then, it's an all or nothing proposition.
Mhm.
When certainly that's not the case. We do know that very interesting things start to happen. I mean, the limbic system isn't supported. Your vagal nerve starts to kind of get lazy, and so heart rate variability, which really is a mitigating thing for stress. Why even
Mhm.
mild exercise is so important. Those things all start to go in the wrong direction, and so you know, the nice thing is like this is accessible to almost all of us, right?
Yeah.
The thing that's a little bit challenging is we are, I think most of science would agree we are always moving in a direction, and so it's either in the wrong direction or the right direction. And so why not do the things that are steering you in the right direction, especially if they're accessible and fun? I mean,
Yeah.
walking and listening to a podcast or music that you enjoy. I often talk about that, like I'm a product of 90s hip hop and I can't listen to that with my young kids around,
Yeah.
unless it's like edited to the point where you can't hear the words, right? And so I really enjoy walking, not just to walk, but also because it's this invitation to engage in an activity I really find fun. And so, yeah, all of the above, right? It's just a shame when someone, is used to very high intensity exercise, and because that's not accessible for whatever reason, they're like, okay, well, I'll just throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is a shame, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was not expecting to talk fitness on this at all. I'm like,
That's
oh
all
my gosh,
right.
I can have you back to like talk about that. Totally, like totally cool. So the fun habit, like talk to me about that. So because I didn't realize that you like got your, trying to get your kids off screens, which I totally get that. I think that's like a universal thing, especially coming out of a pandemic where people were just like, you know what? Whatever goes goes, right? Like we just have to get through this. And so trying to get them out of that and like getting the climbing. So talk to me about adding in that element of fun in a day-to-day life.
Yeah, so a lot of the book is about just being mindful of the choices you make, right? And
Mhm.
so with regards to screens specifically, I don't necessarily villainize them. I think if we're encoding the information that we're taking in, you're using it for research. It's something that, maybe it's pro-social behavior, so you're engaging with relatives that live on
Mhm.
the other side. I don't think all screen use is a poor use of time. I think
Completely agree.
but a lot of us, especially, again, coming out of the pandemic, but this was, universally true even before the pandemic, is that if we're bored, oftentimes, if we engage in an activity that's not necessarily enjoyable, but displaces that frustration or boredom or just kind of gets us out of that crappy mood, we'll think it's an okay use of time. And what we know is that it's really not fulfilling or leading to betterment. And so over long stretches of time, you will start to feel hollow, right? Because
Yeah.
we do need to sort of encode these memories to feel good about life. Or what happens is we'll look back and, you know, depending on the duration of time, let's just say a month, right? And go, whoa, where did that go? And because we haven't, been creating this upward spiral again, we're always kind of in motion, right? Heading in the right way or the wrong way. If we're not leading to betterment, or it's not things that really fill the soul, then we will start to feel empty. And what's the most insidious about that is it happens slowly. So oftentimes we don't know who the culprit is, right? We talk about health equity and mental equity. Like these things either drain us slowly or improve us slowly. And both of those are problematic, right? Because when it happens slowly, if we're kind of depleting ourselves, we wake up 6 weeks from now and we don't know what happened. We're just like, crap, I feel like crap. I'm not connected to anybody. Let me pacify myself one more time with which essentially a drug, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
know that they're components. I think I've talked to enough neuroscientists that you don't want to blame it all on dopamine. It's a complex sort of mechanism that happens, but it's clear that that addiction does parallel, some of the things that are even worse for us, right?
Yeah.
But on the flip, if you're organizing your time in a way where instead of filling it with these things that are sort of empty, you're doing things that you enjoy, connecting with others, connecting with your kids in a way that's, enjoyable, making sure that the things you're doing, even if they're solo activities, are filling you up, like going on walks instead of just kind of plopping down on the couch and, using that time unwisely. These things will have an additive effect and over time really make you feel good about how you're spending your time. So that's the main hypothesis.
Okay. I like all of the in-depth thing. So you talked about engaging your kids like in a joyful manner. And I think sometimes people are burnt out, like especially like in my, audience of stepmoms. People are like, the last thing I want to do is engage my kids. So you engage your kids like in ropes courses or climbing. Like what other ideas do you have for engaging your kids like in a happy way or like a joyful way?
Yeah, so I kind of have two rules, right, that I talk
Okay.
about in the book. So one is that you should let your kids lead to the extent that that makes sense, right? So what
Yeah.
a lot of us do is don't co-create those experiences. Oftentimes, if you have a dialogue, then it can get more interesting instead of it being prescriptive. Like, one of the examples I often use is I used to take my kids to the park, and I would see so many parents approaching that from this sense of duty. So they would just sit on the park bench because this is the thing I need to do to get my kids out of the house. And again, they would be stuck on social media, right? Or
Hmm.
essentially just kind of, gazing off into the distance. Their kids were obviously enjoying themselves, but that time again wasn't fulfilling, right? So,
Hmm.
what is it that where you can have your kid potentially lead you? But the second part is equally as important, that if you're not having fun, then then that's not something that you potentially should be doing. Just like your kid wouldn't want to play with another friend that's not enjoyable, like why do you think it's any different for yourself? So if it's something that you just have an aversion to, as you spoke about, um, then maybe that's not the right choice. And oftentimes it just takes a simple reframing. So one of the
Hmm.
examples I use is this was when my daughter was younger. I was taking her to a tumbling class. Again, this sense of duty, like I just need to get her out of the house, I need to get her active. But I was killing time sitting on the bench, and I really do enjoy dancing, right? And so I was like, I need to be able to improve this situation. And so what I did was, and again, it wasn't kind of provocative or anything, that isn't accessible to anyone. I was just like, there's got to be like a solo instructor that could teach both of us. And sure enough, there was, and it wasn't that much more money. I think it was $5 more a week. So this
That's so
didn't
cool.
come from a place of privilege either. And so I got to engage with her. She was still doing the same activity, developing skills, which she still uses today because she's crushing it at gymnastics. And I have these amazing memories. We did a bunch of numbers to Descendant songs, that we look back at. And so I got to be physically active. So I was engaging in exercise. We were making these crazy memories together. So I'll remember those forever. And then she was still getting, the aerobic benefit and,
Yeah.
using these skills of agility. So that's juxtaposed to the fact that if I just kept sitting on that bench watching her do that, I would remember that as one memory of, yeah, I took my daughter to tumbling class.
Yeah. I like that you touch on that because I feel because I've been caught in this conundrum as well, where you are taking your kid to something because you feel like you have to, right? But then sometimes there's some sort of element of resentment. Like I could be doing something else. I could be
Absolutely.
working. I could be working out. I could be reading. I could be doing something that I want to do. And this is eating into that time. And as a parent, you have to like, okay, you have to make more hours in the day, but like, how do I do that? Right. So I'm going to get up early because I have to get my workout in or I have to like squeeze out work that I need to squeeze out or whatever it is. Like you're trying to like squeeze time wherever you can squeeze it. But I love that you were like, you know what? I'm going to think outside of the box. I'm going to see if I can do that. I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. I should do that. We did gymnastics over the summer and my in-laws would come every time. So it was great for me because I got to catch up with them. Like I would typically see them on Sundays, but then I would see them on Monday as well and talk about whatever we didn't talk about on Sunday. But sometimes I would be like, man, I could be doing other things, right? So now I'm like, oh, I should think of something else like outside of the box. Like we could take a dance class. Like I don't really want to put her in dance, but if we could do something together, because yeah, like you said, she has those memories. I have those memories, but I also am like getting to move my body and I don't have to be dripping sweat to do
Yeah.
it.
And I find that, so I've really been bullish. Like I try to not to be a one trick pony, but I've been bullish on this idea of something that leads you to mastery. Because
Mhm.
another thing, this comes from, again, I won't geek out too much on the
You
psychology,
totally can. Like, go ahead, go for it. I'm here for
but
it.
from transactional analysis, when you're able to shift the teaching to a third party, then you can create joyful moments with your child because you can kind of if one of you makes a mistake, you can kind of, you don't have to get into that teacher mode and get corrective. You can kind of laugh at each
Yeah.
other.
We're
And
both
so,
learning.
yeah, my daughter is much older now, so she doesn't want to dance with dad. So again, I'm glad I made use of that opportunity when I could. But so now we take cooking classes together, right? And
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I think if I remember trying to teach her to make eggs and she would crack, the egg would go everywhere. And like, okay, Sloan, that's not how you're supposed to do it. Let's clean it up. And like, that wasn't fun, right? Because again, it came from the sense of duty. But when we're taking classes from another instructor, even if that's on YouTube, so it's not necessarily something that costs us money,
Oh, cool.
right?
Yeah.
We're just like,
That's a
oh,
great idea.
yeah, like now you can villainize the instructor, right? In a playful way, of course. And
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
and you're in it together, right? So it's more of this bonding situation. And so obviously there are going to be moments where you want to teach your child, and maybe those moments aren't meant to be quote unquote fun. But if
Mhm.
you're trying to find these moments where you want to enjoy each other's company, why not set the stage with the right activity and environment to do so? And so many of us don't think, take that extra step. Like, okay, wait a second, this isn't really conducive to fun. So why did I think it'd be a fun thing to do? Right.
Yeah. Wait, you mean parenting's not fun?
I mean, I'm sure you've heard that saying. I do. It just fell onto me recently, but I do think, and we talked about it a little bit before we hit record, that it's always hard to get these quotes right, right? But essentially, if if parenting is easy, what is it? Oh my goodness, I don't want to waste too much time
It's
of your
okay.
audience, but you know, um, if parenting's not hard, you're not doing it right, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard that too.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Or if you're
so
worried about being a good parent, you probably are.
yeah, right, exactly.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's tons of iterations, but I think that's exactly right. It does take work, right?
Mhm.
Um, Something I just saw yesterday, like it was this amazing art piece where they had made the child out of pieces of the parent. I mean, that's what we signed up for,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
it's neat because you saw the holes in the parent, but it's essentially, created this whole person. And I think, to some degree, we do need to understand that we're co-creating this experience for them, and if we are a dictator, we're going to be treated as such.
Mhm.
And so, to what extent can you figure out that you have a voice, that you don't, it's not something that you have to do all the time, that you get to do some of these things some of the time, especially if you voice your opinion, and your child's going to respect you for that, right? Like,
Yeah. I'm taking one note real quick. So I told you we were just in Italy, like seeing my stepson. And so I had said before we were going, we were planning a trip. We were planning like things that we were going to do. With it being 8,000 degrees, we're not going to be outside the entire time. And so I said to my husband, like, oh, you know what we should do? We should do like a cooking class, or it was like a pasta class we could do. And my husband had said, well, he's never going to be up for that because he's 19. And was like, watch this. And so I was telling like we're super close and like whoever's the messenger is like depending on how it goes. So
sure.
I, texted him and was like, hey, do you want to do a cooking class? And he was like, hell yeah, right. He's like all in. And I'm like, I told you. And he's like, well, yeah, of course, because you asked him. I'm like, whatever. So then like that pasta class got canceled because they were going on vacation, whatever. So I found a different one that was a pizza and a gelato class, which was really cool. So we're at a tabletop that had 6 people, the 4 of us and like 2 honeymooners. And so my daughter's she's 4 and she's got like her own little thing that she's gonna make. So we're making the dough. We're gonna let it rise, and then we're gonna be making gelato, and we're gonna then our pizza's gonna the dough's gonna rise, and we're gonna do our toppings and everything. And so kind of the like we're talking about like, well, what if I'm not gonna do it the right way? She said, well, I don't know how to do it, and I said that's okay. She gave us instructions. The 4 of us all heard them. I will. She was sitting between my husband and I will help you. Like we'll do this together. We just have to make sure to not like create a little hole in the dough or the flour to where like all of the liquid runs out, right? So you had to make
Yeah.
like a little pit. And it was really fun. And even for my 19 or our 19-year-old, like for him to be like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Because it levels the playing field. Everyone is on the same thing. And which takes me back to the conversation we were having before we hit record about that partnership and like building that and not being a dictator, like do this, do that, and like being in their face, but building that partnership of, we're on the same team. Everyone is working towards the same goal. And like I had told you, even as far as parenting goes, like we would say to the older kids, or I would say to them, I'm not your mom and I'm not your dad. Whatever mistake you make, unless you kill yourself or somebody else, we'll get through it. It's not going to be pretty, but like we'll definitely get through it. Like we're going to be on the same team. And I wasn't raised like that. I was raised in it's a my way or the highway kind of situation. Do as I say, not as I do. You will do this. Like essentially, you will be the perfect child. And then, like unlearning that and undoing that perfectionism. And so I try really hard because I do have perfectionist tendencies to make mistakes or like do, things to like level the playing field to my daughter. So she doesn't, so I'm not passing that on, right? Like I try to be super cognizant of not always like intentionally making mistakes, but like I do make mistakes and then I make a big deal out of it. Like, oh my gosh, I just knocked this over or whatever. See, like I make mistakes too, because I don't want her growing up in that mindset of like, well, my mom was perfect. God knows I'm not. But like she never made mistakes, right? And I don't want that passed down, but then I want her to feel safe knowing it's okay if I make a mistake. We'll get through it. We're in this together. It's not a dictatorship. It's not me versus them, or I need to rebel or like do all of these crazy things.
Yeah, I agree. I think I got this wisdom from someone else, but almost to the, when appropriate, celebrate mistakes because,
Yeah,
some of
you're
the best
trying.
things have come from mistakes. Yeah, exactly. And we know, I mean, this comes from Carl Dweck, but I think most people have gotten some sort of access to it. If you don't do that, then you foster a fixed mindset. And we just know that that
Yes.
has a huge ripple effect. So to the extent that making mistakes are okay, be curious, obviously learn from them. If
Mm-hmm,
mistakes continually get repeated, that's a different story.
right. Yep.
But new mistakes mean that you're learning, right? And it's part of the process. And knowing that that's okay. And we're going back to that safety net, right? That we talked about earlier. When the child goes, okay, all right, this kind of sucks, but I'm going to be fine. Then they know they can grow in that space. If not, then they tend to, get into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And growth does not exist in that space. And over time, if that's fostered, we know that, again, it can have pretty dire physiological consequences as well. I want to circle back to your question just to give the listeners that are feeling burnt out, that space can be kind of a downward spiral. So um, one of the things that I tend to suggest is there's really three components to a fun activity. That's the environment, the people that you're doing it with, or the activity itself. So if you're really challenged, like I'm just not finding anything fun to do, really critically looking at those three things, like, okay, well, where are you doing it? Who are the people involved? Especially like some people just kind of need a break from the child. Like, well, are there play dates you can do with an adult who you really enjoy their company, and their child, can then be entertained by the other child because that's a good fit, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, or maybe the activity just sucks. Like maybe you don't want to, go and I remember talking to one adult that's like, I just can't play another game of Minecraft. Well, why are you still doing that? There's so
Yep.
many other things. It doesn't mean that you need to be punitive and tell your child they can never play Minecraft again. Just let them know that's not for you anymore. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that too. So our thing is Candyland. And I'm like, if I have to play Candyland another time before 8:30 o'clock in the morning, I might just go ballistic, right? I don't even know how many times we've played, at least 1,000 times we've played. Like she loves it. But I've said, okay, we're gonna play two more times. I'm starting to feel frustrated. And what I do is we do a lot of consent. And so if she's doing something like to me that I don't like, or if she's being loud or rambunctious or whatever, and I'm trying to focus, I'm like, hey, I'm starting to feel like this. My body is. It doesn't really feel good. Can you just give me 10 minutes or what? I'm going to set a timer. I just need X amount of time of quietness, or I just need some time by myself. Or, I'm only going to play the game for a few more times and then I'm going to do something different. You're more than welcome to do it with me. You can keep playing by yourself. And she's happy to play it by herself. I love that for you. Like, I love that for you. And I also love your idea of play dates with an adult and like another adult that you like. I have a couple of girlfriends that it's almost like a reprieve that your kid, because now they will like play by themselves. When they were babies they didn't, obviously, right? But now that they're old enough where they can play by themselves, I'm like, I need this just as much as they do. Like, let's please go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it creates a supportive environment. And then it allows the child an outlet that, if it is a solo activity, you're not going to get. And so
Mhm.
it can be really effective. And then you get to connect with other adults, which oftentimes is what can lead parents to feel lonely as well, right? Like I
Yeah.
just, you brought up something before we hit recorded, and we kind of laughed about it, but as a generality, it is true. I mean, the focus moves away from adults once you have a child. And sometimes, not having that connection is hurtful. I mean, it's just something that we should be more real about.
Yeah, you're just like a vessel to like produce children. And
Yeah.
then like that's like literally what you are. And then there's no meaning or yeah, it's just like you're just this vessel to like deliver kids. Which yeah, I like I had said when my girlfriend said that to me, like, don't get used to it just to like fill everyone else in. Don't get used to, the attention because once you have your daughter, no one's gonna ask about you. And I was like, the hell? Like that's so backwards. And then yeah, sure enough, like once that happened. So the part that I didn't tell you is when I've had girlfriends that have had kids since then, because I was kind like super caught off guard that she said that. So I've said to my girlfriends, I will always be the friend that checks in on you. Like I will ask about you first because that's what matters. If you are in a good place, if you are in a good situation, like mentally, physically, whatever, or as good as you can be given the situation that you're in, especially if you've just given birth, you're going to be okay and the baby will be okay. But if you're struggling, and a lot of times as parents, you struggle silently, like with the loneliness that you've touched on several times, or, feeling isolated, or, just this is my life. Like, this is what I signed up for. Like this
Yeah, that's
to
right.
play Candyland at like 8:30 in the morning every day. No. Um, to like kind of switch gears here though. So kids have this element of play, like from day one. At what point, given your background, at what point do you think that switch happens where whether it's in childhood or adolescence or in adulthood where we're like, we're not playing anymore. That's it. And it's like all business, no play.
Yeah, so it happens at a kind of different phases for everyone. But it's clear that it's happening quicker now in the modern era. And it's essentially a survival mechanism, right? We know that when we're bombarded with incoming information, and certainly children bring on more, right? I've seen a lot of comedians lately, and I've definitely empathized talking about these emails that the schools send out. I mean, they are bananas, right? Like, I remember it was once a week on like a 8.5 by 11 sheet, and my
Mike's
parents
good.
would, yeah, scan it. And now I'm getting daily emails that are longer than anything I get, from any of my employees. So when we have all this incoming information, we need to create what in psychology we call heuristics, and essentially pathways to get from point A to point B, because we need to survive, right? And so as we create these systems internally to be able to navigate, the complexities of life, we start to lose the ability to, one, enjoy kind of time-free activities, but then also to get curious and be innovative and kind of think outside the box, which a lot of times is this fuel for having fun in those environments.
Mhm.
So it's sort of a 1-2 punch. And so when is it going to happen in adulthood? There's not like a specific like, oh, well, we lose that ability at 25, but it's clear that again, it's happening in general faster. And it is a shame because when when those skills start, when we start to lose those skills, we stop having access to the ability to use creativity for solutions. And so how do you get that back? You really need to be deliberate about practicing it. And again, that's where kids are an amazing asset. I mean, we've been kind of critical, right, for the last 20 minutes, but you have like an amazing teacher right there that can get you
Yeah.
back. Again, if you invite that in, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do exactly what they want, because neither one of you should be a tyrant. But if you kind of explore that territory with them, oftentimes it will come rushing back in, right? And it's clear the evidence, how hugely beneficial that is for folks, even if you're kind of introverted and have a fixed mindset, inviting that in and kind of deliberately practicing that, how much it can come back, and you'll start to see yourself smile again. It's really neat. Again, but we talk about this equity, right? Like, don't expect it to happen, like one day out at an escape room or whatever. It's like, one, you got to find your jam, and two, it kind of builds over time where you're letting that back in and realizing, okay, I don't need a set of instructions to do this. In the book, I talk about some research that I did where I was going to children's museums here in North Carolina, and it was fascinating to watch that as an observer, right? And so you would see children and adults go into these amazing play areas where there's all sorts of like fun, pool noodles and, big Legos and things where you can construct these amazing things within, really, really fascinating installations. And the kids, like within milliseconds, right, would run in just giggling, didn't know the people in there, start creating these, really amazing structures, what we call in psychology storm, form, and norm. So make new friends, build these amazing things. And you would see the adults slowly but surely like walk backwards to the sides of the room because they didn't know what to do without a set of instructions of what am I supposed to do here, right? They were paralyzed.
Yeah.
And it was really unfortunate. And then once they were kind of invited to play, right, then they would get back into it and you would see the smiles grow. And so, I think we all kind of borrow from Brene Brown here, but like, one of the first steps is just giving yourself permission to get back to that childlike state.
Yeah. And you don't have to be perfect all of the time. And I think that's something that we get caught up in, especially as adults, regardless of your demographic or your like title that you hold, right? Is I don't want to look like an idiot in front of, other adults where kids like could care less, which I find this hilarious, especially with like really young kids, like, hey, do you want to play with me? No. Like, imagine if you just came to me and said, hey, Lucia, you want to grab a cup of coffee or, you want to hang out and chat. And I just said no. Or if you had something on your plate that I, like, oh, that probably looks good. And I just reached over and grabbed it or like, just like took your stuff. Like there aren't really any rules, which I find super fascinating. And they just, make them up as they go along. And so that's why I was curious if there was like a certain point where some flip of a switch happens and people or humans just like, I'm not playing anymore. And, I love the unfiltered view of children. And yeah, like they just go in and do whatever, or, like figure things out, or like the imagination is just crazy. And there are times where I'm like, the last thing I want to do is play. But when I feel like that, I know that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds, because I just need that like creative freedom. Like I'm pretty creative, but it's you get caught up in life and like decision fatigue and doing all of the things. And I'm like, what I just need to do is take the breath or like let the breath out and do whatever.
So there's no switch. It's definitely a continuum.
Okay.
We could unpack that, but I don't think it's really that interesting because there's multiple headwinds, right? And, some of what I've already described, but then also, there's a pretty interesting argument about growing up in a meritocracy, which we certainly do in the US, right? I mean, we're really trained from, very young age that the things that we do should impress others, right? At first it's our teachers, then it's our boss, right? And this all kind of leads to, okay, I just need to know what to do to impress this person so I can get to the next ladder. So that's really unfortunate. But for folks that kind of want a solution, there's an amazing thing by John Cleese, who's part of Monty Python.
Yeah.
He's done some really amazing work with leadership. And so he talks about, and you can Google this, it's really easy to find, but the kind of short version is creating kind of a mental playground for yourself where it's a finite amount of time. So, you just time block it on your calendar. Like these 2 hours are where I'm going to just kind of be silly, but it could be with a heady problem. I do this all the time with big problems, but I'm going to approach it playfully. There's no outcome, right? Because the fun game really is, win or lose, you should have still enjoyed it. So if the 2 hours is, ends up not creating any output, that's fine. Generally it does anyways, because that's one of the beautiful things about play. And then when the time's over, you get back to real life, right? And so once you sort of enjoy those moments, you want to integrate them more. But it can be a really fun way to get back into that playful spirit too, especially if you want to do it, through the lens of productivity, because you are A type, and the idea of going playing kickball or dodgeball with adults just is you aren't ready for that invitation yet.
Yeah. Okay, so walk me through like what problem would you work on like in that play type? If somebody is like, okay, that's great, like thanks for that, but like what do I do? Like again, I need the instructions. Like, so what sort of, right? Like, which I get because I've been in that situation too, like especially like, business wise. Like sometimes I'm so in my head that I'm like, I can't see the forest through the trees. Like, help me out here. Like, where is it at?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that can be helpful is nonlinear thinking, right? So one of the traps when we kind of lost those playful muscles is the ability to take ideas from outside influences and integrate them into, these linear pathways that we've created. And so let's say, for you, it might be more podcast listeners, right? Like this is something that I want to achieve. How could I go about it? And then within that space, you just start creating like super silly ideas. Like I'll, dress up in a mascot suit with, one of those,
Oh yeah.
And then, so you have all these fanciful ideas, generally, sometimes you might want to do this with other people too, so you can laugh throughout the process. But once you've kind of come up with all these crazy ideas, then you can start to connect things. So this is so dumb, but this one aspect of that idea is something I've never thought about. Like now that the game is over, let me explore it critically, because I might be able to integrate it in a way that would create this 10x multiple that none of these kind of, general ideas that everyone uses, they're not effective anymore. It is all that I have access to. And so that's how it can be extremely helpful, for two reasons. One, it can generate ideas that just wouldn't have been thought of if you're kind of just looking, at the status quo and in your own market segment. The other is it can lead to more creativity, because we know once we realize that that is something that can be advantageous, we'll start to do it more. And it starts to bleed into things like on your walks, right? Like being able to start to encompass more nonlinear ideas, those aha moments that you have, when you stop thinking in a linear way and you're like in the shower or on a walk or,
Listening to 90s hip hop.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we know as a generality, and this is empirically validated, that it leads to more of those light bulb moments.
Yeah.
Because again, you're able to synthesize information that's not necessarily, fitting the structure that you've been living in, because you're now inviting ideas from the outside world.
Yeah, I would say that totally rings true for me, especially since I don't have the constant information input, like because I'm at my house, right? And and sometimes this is a little bit hard to like work from home because the dishes are screaming at you, or the laundry is, or whatever chores. And so if I'm out of my element, let's say I just go to a coffee shop, I'm so much more productive, right? Because I'm out of my environment, but then I also feel like people are watching me. They're not. I promise you they're not. But I feel like there are. So there's that accountability aspect. Like, okay, I need to make these minutes matter, where you just kind of like get caught up like in your house of doing whatever. But even if I'm out for a walk, sometimes I have the notes app open on my phone. I'm taking notes on ideas that I've got, because I can actually just, listen to the rustling of the trees or the birds chirping, or, maybe I'm listening to a podcast. Like yesterday I was out for a walk and I was listening to a podcast and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a really great idea, but I'm not going to remember it because, I'm going to get back and like life is going to happen as soon as I walk in the door. So I'm like, taking notes. And so my daughter was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm writing, writing something down so I can remember it for later.
No, but I mean, you're kind of validating that,
Yeah.
that kind of, those three pillars, right? Like, yeah, get out of the environment that's not helpful anymore, or inviting people in, right? I mean, I find it fascinating. There's emerging research and companies that will now pair you up with a stranger that you literally just kind of like leave in the corner, and they're finding, especially for folks that have distraction disorders like ADHD, like just that helps people feel focused. Exactly what you're saying. Like they're not really watching you. They're just, another person that has kind of signed up for it. But that, feeling that like, okay, well, we're in this together,
Yeah.
can be helpful for some. And then the activity, right? Like, so, some people make lists and lists aren't helpful anymore. So maybe try mind mapping. Again, maybe it's the activity that's not working for you anymore. So in a work situation where folks aren't really enjoying the way that they do the work anymore, I suggest approaching it like an anthropologist, like, really kind of be mindful of what are the things that are just, grinding you to a halt. And is there a way to do this particular activity in a different manner that would be more enjoyable? And a lot of times, and it's going to be specific to the thing that you're doing, but a lot of times just switching the way that you do it can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I find that reframes are so incredibly important, like especially in my audience of having stepmoms. So like when you're contending with an ex or kids that aren't yours, or you're living in their house, or just different things from the past, and just reframing how you think about it. Like my podcast last week was about like kids trying to connect, right? And so if you're trying to build a relationship with your stepkids, and you're talking about, let's say, some vacation, and they've taken that vacation maybe with their mom and their dad, or maybe they did that with their mom, and so they're relating a story about their mom, and that's triggering sometimes for stepmoms, obviously, because that's their partner's past. And I'm quick to say it's not that they're trying to be a jerk, or it's not that they're coming for you. It's they're just trying to make that connection. Like, oh yeah, I've done that with my mom. It, for the most part, it can be super, super nefarious. Like it's not malicious at all. Like there's no malicious intent. Like they're just looking to make that connection with you. And you don't have to like back up, like, get in your feels about it right away. You can acknowledge that. And if it's not a conversation that you want to stay on, that's fine. You can redirect it, but you don't have to like, we're not talking about that anymore. Like, I don't want to hear about your mom or whatever. It's just making that connection. And yeah, the reframe is super important.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different things. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm like, there's so many things that I'm like, oh yeah, I could have him back to talk about this and this and this and this. Where can everyone find you? Where do you live online?
So I write about the science of fun at michaelrucker.com, and the book came out this year, The Fun Habit. So if you're interested in inviting more joy and fun into your life, I'd be grateful if you checked out the book, The Fun
All right.
Habit.
Awesome. Yeah, I will link everything in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world, and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.